and giving the BLM basics. Goseland is going to join me here in a minute to talk about the local founding of the group. But as many of you probably know, Black Lives Matter started as a grassroots movement. It was initially a hashtag that was started in the uprising following the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. And we saw nationwide people rising up and saying that Black Lives Matter, and that's where it got started. And as you probably know, that grew into a national movement, and eventually an organization called Black Lives Matter was founded. But we're still grassroots, and not every Black Lives Matter group is doing the same thing. And the organization isn't one thing either, right? We're not a homogenous group. Also, there is some confusion that anybody wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt or swag is affiliated with the local group or is aligned with the BLM views and demands. That's not necessarily true, as we know, right? So it's our job to also make sure that we're leveraging and promoting the voices of the actual BLM leadership in our community. So I'm going to hand it over to Louis so he can talk about his experience as one of the co-founders of BLM.
Thanks, Kate, and thank everyone for being here. Again, my name is Louis Goseland. I'm a longtime community organizer. I've lived in West Bloomington for about 5 years, and yeah, I'm an executive officer with BloNo DSA, as well as a volunteer sort of organizer support with BLM BloNo. And as Kate mentioned, the words Black Lives Matter started as a call to action. It was something that was heard across the country in the aftermath of the murder of Trayvon Martin. And those words rang so true that across the country, people started using them as a call to action, as a way to bring people together, as a way to assert and affirm the inherent dignity and worth of Black lives and the need for a direct confrontation to dismantle systemic racism. And so when I moved to Bloomington in 2015, in the latter part of the year, there were people who were already hearing those words. There were people who were already coming together downtown. And around that time, people were coming together to mourn the deaths of Philando Castile, of Alton Sterling. And what we realized is that as we were coming together, there was this sense that, yes, racism exists. Yes, racism is killing people. Yes, we should do something about it. But what wasn't in place yet was the recognition and the call to action, the drive to confront it right here in our community. A lot of folks felt like that's a problem that exists, but I live in a nice progressive place. It's comfortable and everyone's friendly. And what we realized on the west side is that that's not the case. We were seeing people getting pulled over and searched. We were seeing people getting hassled for just existing in the community. And so what we recognized is that the work that needed to be done in our own backyards. It needed to be done on the streets and blocks that we lived in. It needed to be done, as what Kai said, with the decision makers right here in our community. And so initially we came together over at Washington and Allen just as a group of people from the neighborhood and people who are involved with organizing. I see a lot of folks who have been a part of that, who are here. Sonny Garcia was involved with organizing that. A lot of the folks who are here doing support roles was involved in organizing that. And at the time, we didn't have a name, but what we recognized is that as more and more people came in to get involved and start organizing, more and more Black folks were sharing with us what the experience was. And it was from Black folks from the community that decided, this is Black Lives Matter. This is what those words mean. This is the work that we're doing. This is what this organizing is going to be called. And at that moment, it was clear. It's up to us as accomplices, as white folks, as non-Black folks, who show up to do this work, to fall behind Black leadership and recognize that if we're going to solve this, if we're going to confront this, it's going to be through Black leadership, Black power, and organizing and putting our full selves behind it. And so that's the work that we're called to do here today. It started with a meeting on December 15th, 2015. Yeah, 2015, where 400 people packed the basement of Mount Pisgah. It blew our minds how many people who were ready to recognize that the problem existed right here in our community, and were ready to stand toe-to-toe, face-to-face with Brendan Hefner, then the chief of police of the Bloomington Police Department. And in that space, we had the power. He recognized and we recognized that we can demand the things that we need to see happen in this community. Long story short, because we've got work here to do today, is we were able to not only lay those out and demand that he answer to the set of those demands, but we're actually able to organize and win the first civilian review board here in Bloomington, the Public Safety and Community Relations Board. That was done not by asking nicely, right? Not by writing strongly worded letters and hoping someone hears us, but by sitting the person in power right there and pushing until we won. And that's what we're called to do today. Today I hear a lot of people, and some of them are in elected office, who are saying Black Lives Matter, and that's progress. But I'll tell you, some of those same folks weren't saying that when we got involved. That's progress. We want to bring people in. But what we want to do is make sure that they are held accountable to those words. And so while in 2015 our list of demands were rooted in reform and in a review board and in doing policing just a little more nicely, a little more humanely, because that's what the political space at the time called for, today we're saying defund the police, right? We're saying put that money where it belongs, and that's in supporting the lives of people, not in investing in the enforcement and criminalization of our communities. And so it's been a progression, and we're learning together. We welcome the new folks who maybe weren't with us in 2015, who are here ready to take action now. And the thing that I will say is that throughout all of this, we must recognize that our role is to bring our full selves, our full power, and to follow the leadership of the Black community that is rising in this community, that should be celebrated in this community, and that should be empowered to the actions that we're willing to take and the commitments that we're willing to take as accomplices. So I'm going to step back, and we're going to dig into just how we can do that just a little bit better. So thank you all for being here, and talk to folks who are around. Ask them. There's many people here who have been involved with this movement for over the years. There's a lot that can be learned, and we're happy that you're with us, even if this is your first time stepping in. So thanks.
Thank you, Louis. And I would also just note that I was not part of BLM then either, so I'm newer to this space too, and I have been very much welcomed, and we need all of us to step up as leaders. So again, just really excited to see you all here. I am now going to transition into talking about those 5 tools that I mentioned earlier that we can use in those difficult conversations. But before I do, with just a show of hands, how many of you have tried to have a conversation with someone in your life, someone you have a personal relationship, like a friend or family member, and it's been difficult, right? Because they don't necessarily think that Black Lives Matter is the way to go, or that we're pushing too far. Exactly. It can be really challenging. I know I've been in situations where I feel like I've failed in those conversations, and I've had other experiences where I thought it went well. So that's okay. We're all here to learn more about that. But those conversations are one of the ways that we can move support in our community for these demands and making them a reality in our community. So a few things that we need to do when we engage in these conversations is, 1, seek to really understand the root of those beliefs in other people and not assume you know. I used to do this all the time, especially with people in my family, oh, I know why you believe this, and I'm not even going to ask you why. I'm just going to make this assumption, and I'm going to rebut it. That did not get me very far, let me tell you. So we have to actually seek to understand how they're thinking about it and ask them, and we're going to learn more about that in a minute. We need to reframe and educate that root cause and that root belief if possible. And finally, even if we don't move someone, we just need to normalize support for these demands and support for BLM in our community. The more our friends and family hear more people saying that I support Black Lives Matter, I support the demands they put out, the more that's going to normalize it for them, and the more they're going to become comfortable with moving that direction themselves. So we're going to go over and review 5 tools that come from a group called Aware LA. They're a white group affiliated with the Black Lives Matter Los Angeles group, and I actually did a training with them last week, which was pretty cool. So I'm going to borrow some stuff from them. But before we get started, I also want to mention 3 myths that often create barriers for us when we engage in these conversations. The first one is that we have to engage everyone who does or says a racist thing in our life every single time we do it. Now, we do want to step up and challenge ourselves, and even if it feels uncomfortable, we want to call out even acquaintances or folks when they do and say racist things. But the reality is sometimes that harms us, sometimes it puts us in danger, and we have to recognize in those circumstances it may not be the best approach. But we do need to call that out when we can, and we do need to call in those folks we have personal relationships with, the friends, family members, and colleagues that I mentioned. But as you heard from Radiance and other folks, like, this is a movement, it's going to take time, and we live in a racist society, so if you want to call out every single racist thing you see, you're might burn out and get exhausted pretty quickly. So we also have to take care of ourselves while challenging ourselves to do more. The third thing, sometimes we feel like we have to win this debate every single time we talk about it with somebody, or we have to resolve this issue with them every single conversation. But our personal relationships with folks last over time, and conversations happen over time. So it's okay if you don't move somebody or change their mind in one conversation. That's not usually the way it works anyway. We have to stay committed to re-engaging with those folks and continuing this work even when it's hard and takes a lot of time. And again, that's a way we can reiterate and normalize support for the BLM demands is over time. The third thing is that making a mistake, maybe I accidentally said something that was problematic in one of those conversations. Well, now I've failed, because now they've caught me saying something that's like racist or problematic, and they're just going to throw that in my face. But the reality is, we live in a racist society founded on white supremacy. All of us are going to make mistakes. I say that all the time. I make mistakes in this work all of the time in all of these conversations, but I reflect about it. I take ownership of those mistakes that I make and acknowledge the harm that I've caused if I cause it. And then I also think about, well, how can I do that differently next time? How can I improve? I'm not going to give up. This is too important for that. We have to stay committed to re-engaging even when we feel like we've made a mistake. So mistakes are okay. So those are the three myths. Now I'm going to invite Joel Studebaker, Anakin Fox, and Cecelia Long to come up, and they are going to talk about the tools and actually give you some demonstrations before we ask you to practice. So please help me welcome them.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for being here. As Kate said, we are going to actually go through these 5 tools. And then we're going to get to some role play, and you'll get to actually try them out with some people around you. So I'm going to jump in here. And I do want to note that Anakin and Cecelia are going to be doing some demonstrations. You might hear some hurtful and racist things during that demonstration. And during our role play, we might ask you to say some hurtful things. Of course, that's not because we believe them or because we want people to say those things, but it's part of us learning and practicing and acknowledging that those things are said and that we do need to respond to them. Okay, so without further ado, 5 tools, and the first one is to be curious. Can everybody repeat after me? I'm going to be a little teachery. So be curious.
Be curious.
Thank you. Okay, so when you're talking to somebody who says something problematic, we want to assume positive intent on their part, even if we know what they're saying is wrong. So you want to figure out why they're saying that. What is the root or the core reason why they believe that? So that means asking questions. You want to get to know more about why they're saying it, and ideally uncover something you can connect with them with. That way you can bridge the gap and offer an alternative point of view. Okay, so for each of these, Anakin is going to be demonstrating. They will be saying something that might make you cringe. And yes, something problematic. And then Cecelia is going to first demonstrate what might be the way we naturally respond. Then we'll take a second take, where Cecelia is going to try to use our tool, which in this case is to be curious. So.
Saying Black Lives Matter is racist. How can you keep white people out of the conversation like that?
You're just wrong. How could you say something like that?
Okay, now Cecelia is going to try to be curious.
Saying Black Lives Matter is racist. How can you keep white people out of the conversation like that?
You know, that's not my understanding. Why do you think that?
That was much better, Cecelia. Thank you so much. Everybody give them a round of applause, please. Not Anakin. They said awful things, but Cecelia. Okay, so here we go. We're going to talk about our second tool, which is educating. So of course, we want to be curious, we want to understand where they're coming from, but this is all in an effort to be able to help explain what we've learned and what we understand to be the truth. So we want to use this strategy when we're at a point that we can inform people why their statements are inaccurate or incomplete. The point here is not to debate or to judge. We want to offer a new piece of knowledge while also attempting to stay connected and non-judgmental. So it's important here that we want to help somebody understand. That doesn't necessarily mean just yelling facts at them. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Anakin.
Defunding the police doesn't make sense. It'll just give the police less resources and increase crime.
The police are racist, and I can't believe that you would say something like that.
Yeah, I still think... Just go ahead. Defunding the police is horrible. It'll give the police less resources and increase crime.
You know, I've learned that the police are trained in a culture that perpetrates racism, and just imagine if we had more resources to put into mental health and homeless services.
Thank you. Okay, so that was an example of educating. Notice that Cecelia is bringing it back to something that she's learned, which is actually another great tool to use is, you know, if you've learned something as a white person and you're talking to another white person, being able to ground this conversation in the things that you've learned that you're hoping they'll learn too. Okay, so that's our first two tools. Be curious.
Be curious.
Thank you. And educating.
Educating.
So our third tool is going to be expressing a personal emotional reaction. How many people have had one of these difficult conversations with a family member or a friend, maybe a tense situation at Thanksgiving? So this strategy is going to be most effective with those close family members, friends, and also young children. It involves telling people who say problematic things what it's like for you to hear those things. And it can also include asking them to respect who you are and notice that their speech is not okay with you. So this is actually making that personal connection very real and asking them to respect it. Okay, so Anakin.
The police are good. They're bad apples in every job.
All the police suck, you're wrong, and is it okay for bad apples to kill people?
Who said that at Thanksgiving dinner? Okay, so let's try that again, and this time Cecelia is going to try to express her personal feelings, but maybe in a way that will make a connection instead of being accusatory.
The police are good. They're bad apples in every job.
You know, that really makes me sad to hear you say that. You know, I think that there's more to talk about here. And hearing you say that makes me want to spend less time with you.
Yeah, effective tool. Okay, so far we've covered be curious, education, personal emotional response. That one doesn't work as well for the chant, but that's okay. We're moving on to tool 4, which is empathetic relating. Okay, so this one is one you might use less often. This is what you use when you're talking to somebody that clearly understands emotion, maybe experiences other people's emotion. You know they're a bit empathetic. This is where we're going to invite people who say problematic things. Maybe they're making problematic jokes. We're going to invite them to imagine how it would feel if they were the butt of the joke and they heard that. Or, you know, if they were somebody who was going to actually be hurt by those words. We want to invite them to feel what it would be like to feel that. So, to Anakin.
Obviously, black people don't want peace, otherwise they wouldn't be looting and rioting.
That seems really easy for you to say with your white privilege and not even knowing them.
Okay, so this time Cecelia is instead going to try to help Anakin think about what it would be like to hear that hurtful thing if it was actually a hurtful experience.
Obviously, black people don't want peace, otherwise they wouldn't be looting and rioting.
Well, you know, Kai and Radians who were up here earlier, they weren't out looting and rioting. They were actually protesting peacefully the last several weeks. I wonder what they would think if they heard you say that.
And there we go, asking Anakin to think about people that he knows who might be hurt by that statement. Okay, so that was empathetic relating. Fantastic. So now we're on to point 5. This is our last tool, and this one is returning later. So who has had a conversation where at the end both people left feeling the same way they did at the beginning of the conversation? Yeah. Who's had like a Facebook comment war where nobody's mind was changed? Yeah. Okay. So it's very important that we recognize, one, that sometimes these things take time and not a single conversation. And also that it's important to give ourselves permission to return to somebody once the situation has shifted. We can deal with things at a later time. So, you know, you might hear a colleague say something at work that's really awful. And in the moment, you might not be prepared to respond. You might not know what to say. So you can wait a day, wait a week, process it, think about how you can clearly and cogently respond, and then return to them and say, hey, you said something in a meeting last week that really bothered me, and I'd really like to talk about it. And that's because sometimes we need to develop clarity ourselves, especially to be effective communicators. In the heat of the moment isn't necessarily when we're going to be best. And it's also best to engage when we can make the emotional headspace for ourselves to be curious, to relate, to better understand, and to educate. And so we want to have realistic expectations for ourselves, and also know that sometimes it's going to take multiple conversations to get through it. So that is it. Please give a round of applause again for Anakin for being willing to say awful things in front of you and repeating them every single time. And Cecelia for giving us some great demonstrations. And I'm going to hand it back to Kate.